Joining us to talk about this is Leah Pinto, who was a former teacher for 12 years.
First question is what are your thoughts on textbooks in general, especially like the prices? Like, what are your thoughts on them?
I have very strong feelings about textbooks, as far as not only the price but also the usability. As a science person, and that's all my career has been, in science, is they don't necessarily keep up anyways, and so you're investing a lot of money in a resource that doesn't always reflect the most current information, and they are very expensive. They become prohibitive for a lot of I taught in a Title I district in a very rural area. We could not afford the latest and greatest textbooks. And so it creates this inequity among the students where if you're in an affluent district, you probably will have a better level of current content than other students in other situations. So I think as a teacher, seeing that inequity really was difficult. It became difficult as a teacher to not have a textbook to use because it was no longer relevant information. And so we'd have to go out and find our information elsewhere. And then as a student, throughout both my bachelor's and master's program, it's a lot of money, and it encourages you to try and find other ways to pass the class, maybe without ever going out and buying the textbook. And it puts you kind of at a disadvantage unless you buy into that ridiculously expensive book that the professor may only reference a couple of times.
Wow. All right. So my next question is, how much do you think textbooks are still needed today compared to how they were needed, say, 15 years ago? Like, do you think they are as needed, like they are still like such as a requirement, or do you think there's other ways to assess student learning?
I will say that I think there are other much better ways to access content for students other than a written textbook. There's a lot of issues with textbook, not only in the fact that they are not necessarily relevant and keeping up with information, but also in like how students are able to access them. Some students are going to come to you with lower reading levels, language challenges, dyslexia, all these challenges that we see in the classroom, and a textbook doesn't necessarily have accommodations for those. The teacher and the student have to work to find accommodations, whereas I can find a content like some kind of online accessible content that automatically differentiates for all those different subpopulations within my classroom. When I was teaching, probably my last 5 years in the classroom, we used the textbook to cut out pictures because that was the only thing it was good for. Every other piece of content we gave, all the other learning we did was in other ways, really great ways. We would use a combination of videos, worksheets, hands-on activities, you name it, we used it, everything except a textbook.
Okay. All right. So I guess as maybe as a student when you're buying, or maybe you just know anyone, have you ever known anyone that kind of went around and say like, I don't know, maybe bought a textbook from overseas? Because I've done a lot of research and they say like you can buy textbooks from overseas for almost about half the price even. Have you ever or maybe have went to an older version of the book? And
yes.
Have you ever seen anyone, or maybe have done that, or can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, in my master's program, going through the chemistry class, specifically, I remember this. I was looking for the class, the textbook that they gave me, and pulling it up online, I found a used book for much cheaper option. When I got it, it was pretty much unusable. Like it said it was in really good condition, but it was not. And so I sent it back and I ended up getting another one because I didn't want to pay full price for a brand new one. And it was still the wrong edition because I went for the cheaper version. So it became a real challenge I was looking for any way possible to get around paying this $400 textbook fee. And I wasn't able to. I know there's all kinds of ways you can rent it. You can access it, like you said, overseas by a different version, but it was really challenging, took a lot of time, and still didn't work.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. All right. So,
Hated that chemistry class anyways, but still, that's different. That's off topic.
okay. So, as a teacher, do you see any significant differences in newer books compared to just the version that came before it? Like how often? Because you hear this all the time. Like you hear these textbook companies, they release a book and very little is different. The cover might be different. They might change a few lines here and there, but overall, it's pretty much the same book. Can you speak on that a little bit?
I agree with that to a degree.
Mhm.
So in Texas where I live, every 8 years we go through an adoption process where you get a new textbook. So every 8 years, every content area like language arts, math, science, and social studies has to adopt a new resource. Maybe there's not a lot of changes in like English, math. You might not see like it pretty much is recovered and then resubmitted. But in science and social studies, you really do have some significant changes. Sometimes content will change, and it doesn't the book doesn't necessarily keep up with that. Like we have all these great latest discoveries, and thinking may have changed. We have new, or we've disproved certain theories, and the textbook really still doesn't reflect that. And it may take 20 or 30 years before it really catches up. It's quite sad. So even though you're investing all this curriculum money every 8 years to stay updated, it's still not staying current with current scientific thought or history. There's just changes that happen. So no, I would agree with that it's oftentimes not current content, and it's a lot of the same stuff, and there's not a lot of relevancy to anything that's changed.
Yeah, not enough a warrant, but having to buy a new book. It's one thing to have it, but to make it mandatory to
Every
purchase
8 years, yeah, it's ridiculous. Especially again that equity issue where not every district can afford that every 8 years, and so you end up with secondhand, old materials, a class set instead of one for each kid, or anything like that. Like all these ways we try and adjust to make it work, even though it's not valid. It's not a valid learning tool necessarily.
Okay, all right. So why do you think, like, and this is from your opinion, and I hope this doesn't get you in trouble, but why do you think schools are constantly pushing new books on students? Because, a lot of they don't even have a choice. It's like, no, this is the books we have. This is what you have to get. Doesn't matter what books your older siblings had when they went to school. You're going to have to get new ones. Why do you think schools push that so much?
That is a really good question. I don't understand, especially going through college, why I needed the 14th version of the chemistry. We'll go back to that one. But why did I need the 14th version of the chemistry textbook when it really wasn't any different from the 13th? And yet it's an extra several $100s. I'm not sure. I think part of it is simply to keep the relevancy of the professor. Like if I'm able to go out and get the book and just do it on my own, then why am I paying this exorbitant amount for my tuition and then buying into the supplies? I do think a lot of people buy books from the colleges themselves, and maybe there's a portion of that they're getting access to. It doesn't. I'm not sure I have a logical reason, because I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I don't know where the logic is in that.
Yeah.
And honestly, in college, and I went to a great school. It was a state school. It was not a private institution. Like it was a really good basic level education. And there's just no reason to have to change that book every year. So it didn't make any sense to me.
Okay. All right. So this next question, so at your school, from your experience as a teacher, who made it mandatory that certain books had to be used? And were you ever told that you had to specifically go off of a book, or were you allowed freedom? How does that work? Like, do teachers have control of how they teach, or is it pretty much like a pipeline situation? Can you kind of speak on that a little bit?
As a teacher, we were in my district, we were given a lot of free reign as far as how we chose to construct the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're given these state standards and I have to teach the standards, but how I teach them is often up to me. And so we were able to not necessarily use the textbook for, I will say in my district, we couldn't use the textbook. We purchased a book that it was a consumable version, and then it had an online like component for their like digital textbook. And we could never really access the digital textbook, and the consumables got used up within 2 years. Like no matter how gentle you are with these books, they're going to get used up. So after that, we really didn't have access to a textbook at all and didn't miss it. Yeah, just didn't at all. I think it does depend on content area somewhat. I think in language arts, there's often more of a push that you have to teach off of these specific texts or these specific passages within the textbook. In my current position, I work with teachers all over the state of Texas and Florida, and they have a range of autonomy. Some of them are like scripted down to the word. You will use this passage on this day, textbook page number 368. Others are like, I don't know, let's just do some, whatever today. So it is a wide range. I think it depends a lot on the district, a lot on the individual teachers and their experience and ability levels. I know that, the state of Texas requires that update every 8 years, and the teachers go through the adoption process. So in larger districts, it's often curriculum coordinators, science specialists, whatever, who are the ones who decide what book it's going to be or what resource they're going to use. I think to a degree, some people are finally catching on and moving away from just a paper textbook as your only curriculum resource. So in some districts, the teachers have a lot of input on what product they get. And in other districts, they're like, this is what we chose. This is what you get. Have fun. So it can really vary pretty widely.
Okay, so as a teacher, does that feel kind of intrusive in how you like to teach? Like, do you feel burdened by that? Do you prefer to work for a school like that, or do you prefer, like, just kind of speak on that? Like, what are your preferences? Is that a good thing, or is it kind of like mixed results? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think education is changing. And because of the teacher shortages we're seeing, we're getting so many teachers coming in that don't have much experience. Some of them haven't even been through a full teaching program. They're getting alternate certified. We're going to some really crazy links to get teachers in the classroom right now. And these teachers may need that extra support of having more scripted, more complete curriculum handed to them. Whereas an experienced teacher, one who's been in the classroom a while and knows how their students learn, how their students work, and how to craft a really good lesson, really doesn't need that level of scripting. And that really can hold back, I think, the learning that happens, because so much of what a teacher does is read their students and make decisions based on what they're getting in that moment, that just-in-time instruction. And a textbook never allows for that. Like, you just go on to the next paragraph, you go on to the next question, the next unit. There's none of that. Let's go deeper into this. Hey, y'all are really curious about this. I can use this for a lot of, let's get into this next thing. Or alternately, like, they're not getting this. They are so not getting this. We need to take a step back. I'm going to build a foundation and redo it. And there's none of that available in a textbook. Like, that just doesn't work. But that's the craft of a teacher and an experienced teacher. So if you don't have that level of experience, then at least there's some structure and support there when you have a written curriculum.
Okay. All right. So excuse me, one last question.
Okay.
What is something that schools all across the country need to realize when it comes to textbooks in general, or the textbook companies, or anything? Like, what is something that you think, from your opinion, that all schools should need to realize?
without sounding too negative, what the textbook companies are promising when they come into a district and they have all the bells and whistles and they have all this fabulous stuff is not what's being delivered down at the student level. So it's not translating from, you know, whichever textbook company it is, and they have all this wonderful stuff and it's going to be so great for your kids. But by the time it reaches, especially a new student, a new teacher, a struggling teacher, all they have is one single tool. It's a book, and it's not enough. Like, you have to have more tools in your tool book, and you have to have more options to reach all your students in so many different ways. And a textbook is just so much one size fits all. It's limited in how you can differentiate. It's limited in how you can change things up and explore. And the companies may claim otherwise. They may say, oh no, we have this version, or it's not practical in the classroom to differentiate using a textbook, and it limits what you're able to do as far as exploring in a lot of different ways.